The United States moves to protect undocumented immigrant spouses and children of U.S. citizens from deportation. Plus, the race for the White House is essentially tied as the current and former president prepare for their first debate. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Spouses of U.S. citizens who entered the country illegally will now be able to apply for legal residency without leaving the United States. It's a major change to U.S. immigration policy that will offer protection to an estimated 500,000 people. We begin with this report from CGTN's Jim Spellman.
A new executive order from U.S. President Joe Biden will allow hundreds of thousands of undocumented spouses of U.S. citizens to remain in the country legally. The policy announcement comes as Biden marks the 12th anniversary of DACA, the Obama-era action that has allowed migrants who entered the country as children in violation of U.S. law to remain in the country.
But living in the United States all this time with this fear and uncertainty, we can fix that. And that's what I'm going to do today.
Marrying a U.S. citizen has typically been a way to gain U.S. citizenship, but spouses who entered the United States illegally have previously faced major hurdles, including requirements to leave the country for 10 years before applying to return. The new policy will allow spouses who have been in the U.S. for at least 10 years to apply for legal residency without leaving. Non-citizen children of those spouses will also be eligible. Biden has faced political pressure from both sides over immigration, with some voters wanting tighter borders and others wanting more humane handling of migrants and more routes to U.S. citizenship. A recent policy change that limits the number of migrants who can seek asylum away from official border crossings each day has been criticized by some pro-immigration advocates, including those in Biden's Democratic Party. The Biden campaign hopes the new policy for spouses will help regain some of that support as the November presidential election approaches.
I'm proud of the president. This is long overdue. These are for spouses of American citizens, and they have lived in the country for 10 years. And until they can work, so they can pay taxes, this is really a bold move by the president, one that I think will be welcome across the Democratic Party and by many in this country.
Biden's opponent in the election, former President Donald Trump, blasted the new policy on his Truth Social platform, writing in part, "Biden is preparing to give mass amnesty to hundreds of thousands. This is unsustainable and can't be allowed to continue. On day one, we will shut down the border and start deporting millions." The White House expects the new process to be in place by the end of the summer and estimates about 500,000 spouses and 50,000 children will be eligible. Jim Spellman, CGTN, Washington.
There is much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. Rina Shah is a political commentator and strategist. Maté hosts Pushback with Maté on the Grayzone, an independent news website. Also with us is Estopinan. He heads the Estopinan Group, a political consulting firm. And Douglas Sloan is a political analyst and principal at the National Capital Strategy Group. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. Douglas Sloan, you're in the studio. Rina's in the studio. That's great. Douglas, let me start with you. Let's start with this executive order. As I just said, it will provide legal protections against deportation for up to 500,000 people and for children under 21 whose parents were married to a U.S. citizen. Of course, at this stage of any president's term, nothing is done without any careful thought and strategy about the election. We're 4.5 months, just under 4.5 months away from the election. So what do you think was the president's motivation?
Well, I think this was a good move by the president. This is a move that shows compassion. I mean, when we're talking about not deporting undocumented immigrants, these are the people that have been here ever since they were little kids. They have no idea what their home country is like. They don't speak the language. They speak English. And for all intents and purposes, these are U.S. citizens that haven't committed any crimes or anything like that. So this is really a compassionate move by Biden, and it's something that I feel will gain him favor with, obviously, with the Hispanic vote. We're in an election year, and this is something that is calculated by Biden, obviously, to try to move forward with that vote to ensure that we can, or rather, he can lock that up.
Is it more about that, winning votes, rather than compassion? Because he could have done this 3 years ago, couldn't he?
I suppose it could, but you always have that Republican wall, that Republican pushback. Remember, Biden was trying to get the movement passed for strong bipartisan immigration legislation that was blocked by Republicans at the behest of Donald Trump. So he's been trying to make moves in that regard. But he has suffered pushback by the Republicans. So, I don't know if something like this could have been done 3 years ago without strenuous Republican pushback.
Yeah. Erin Maté, great to have you with us, Erin. And of course, there are all kinds of reasons we're hearing about why President Biden announced this at this time. Was he also acting under pressure from the progressive wing of the Democrat Party? And is this effectively, going to use the A word here, an amnesty?
Well, I hope he was acting under pressure from the progressive wing, because Biden has ignored the progressives on, for example, supporting Israel as it commits mass atrocities inside Gaza. And anything Biden can do to win over progressive voters, I think, will be good for his chances, because people are abandoning him in droves, largely because of his unfettered support for Israel. But yes, recall that this comes shortly after he adopted Trump's policy when it comes to turning away asylum seekers. After railing against Trump for being cruel towards undocumented immigrants, Biden adopted a critical Trump policy, and that's why the ACLU is now suing him. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if in the face of that, Biden decided to adopt this policy to try to placate progressives. I don't think, though, it's going to work when he's embracing Trump's immigration policies when it comes to asylum seekers, and when he's supplying unfettered support to Israel as it commits so many unspeakable atrocities against Palestinians. I don't think that will be enough for Biden to win over the progressives that he needs to win in 2024.
Artis Estopinan, what do you make of this move? I mean, there was bipartisan immigration legislation in Congress, and that legislation was killed by Donald Trump. But what do you make of this latest move?
Well, first of all, President Trump did not kill the legislation that the Democrats wanted to put forth to allow 5,000 immigrants a day to come in the United States illegally. And now, as we're witnessing in the border with Mexico, there's 2,400 cap of illegal immigrants coming in a day, plus many illegal children are coming in, because children are allowed to come in as full amnesty. The fact of the matter, Anand, is that I'm very happy as a Hispanic American to see that the spouses of U.S. citizens are able to bring in their or make legal their spouses who are illegal. But the fact of the matter is, do we know who these folks are? What is the criteria? Here in the state of Maryland, where I live, a mother of 5 was raped and killed by an illegal immigrant. This is the second woman that was killed here in the state of Maryland, and we see that played out, and we saw it in Georgia, in California. It's a disaster. What the president has done, Biden and the administration, the Democrats, is have an open border of over 10 million illegals that have come in 3.5 years, with Joe Biden just saying, there's nothing I could do. And it's the American people, in my opinion, are very upset. And that, besides the inflation and the high cost of everything, illegal immigration is going to cost them the election.
Rina, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, how do you see this playing out, especially during the election? And are Republicans going to weaponize this? Because they're going to call it amnesty, aren't they?
Well, they're going to call it mass amnesty when, at a time when Donald Trump is talking about mass deportation as a potential for what is possible when he takes the White House again. Now, look, what my co-panelists just talked about was chain migration. Something that Donald Trump has in his own family. Melania Trump has brought over her mother, her father. They live in the state of Maryland, last I checked. So this is something we need to be real about. Legally, yes, and that is what the president is doing, is saying, President Biden is saying, legally, we will allow for families not to be separated. I think that is a very healthy thing. The Republican Party, I know that I have served on Capitol Hill, wants families to be together, wants to support the American family unit, wants to promote American families. You can't do that if you're splitting up families. And I think it's very important that we all acknowledge a reality here. The vast majority of the problem rests with visa overstays.
Right.
It is not about people pouring over the border entirely. It is about people overstaying their visas. People part of the au pair program, for example, that brings young women from around the world to help American families. I personally know those examples where those people have overstayed illegally. So I would just want to push back on this idea that people are pouring over the border in mass numbers just under the Biden administration. Excuse me, let me finish my point.
Illegal immigrants.
Okay, Art, one moment. I'll get back to you, Art. I'll get back to you, Art. Rina, finish what you're saying.
They were pouring over the border during Trump's time, prior to Trump's time, and during Biden's time. No president has solved the problem.
Very quickly, Rina, I get your point about keeping families together, but when it's being done at this time, 4.5 months before the election, you have to ask, what's the motivation, right? Is this about votes?
It's the campaign. It's about votes.
Right.
Well, what do we expect? We see Trump going for votes. We see Biden going for votes. How can we peg any of them as any different when they know what's on the line and that they have a general election to get through less than 6 months from now? So I don't think that needs to be characterizing anything here. I think we need to say, how do we keep the American family unit stronger? You don't do that by deporting mother and son.
Okay. Art, very quickly, a brief response, please.
No, I mean, I support keeping the families together, but the fact of the matter is that we cannot have an open border. We have had over 10 million. We don't even know how many illegals have come. A lot of, some of them have been murderers, terrorists, and we have an open border policy. That is unsustainable. That is not acceptable.
Yeah. Okay, I need to move on right now. Douglas, there was a recent New York Times Siena College poll which found that former President Donald Trump is winning more than 20% of the black vote in battleground states. It's a major increase over the last election. How do you explain that?
Well, I don't feel that I have to explain that. I've been on the show prior discussing the difference between the polling outfits that have done the polls. I like to cite Cornell Belcher's poll by Brilliant Corners that specifically focused on black voters and found that black voters' #1 fear and issue in this election is the re-election of Donald Trump. That his support among black voters has slipped from 20% to 12% now, and that black voters are energized about this election and going to come out and vote against.
Yeah, but this poll's telling us that support has increased, and there was a CNN poll that also told us the same thing.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, you see this. I've seen this before. I saw this back in 2012. Mitt Romney and Barack Obama. Mitt Romney was allegedly making all these inroads to the black community, and we found that simply wasn't the case.
Okay, there's one other thing. I'll get to you, Art. One other thing, Douglas. Trump is trying to cast Biden as being anti-black. Let's listen to this.
Millions of illegal aliens are pouring in and they're taking your jobs. The black community is being hurt more by the illegal aliens, 16, 17 million. They're taking your jobs. You're down 6-7% from where you were just 3 years ago with me. The crime is most rampant right here and in African-American communities, and more people see me and they say, sir, we want protection. We want police to protect us. We don't want to get robbed and mugged and beat up or killed because we want to walk across the street to buy a loaf of bread.
So what do you make of the way Donald Trump is framing this?
Well, to go into the black community and tell African Americans that they should be frightened of their own people, be frightened of their own community, their own communities, and to say that immigrants are taking their jobs when that simply is not the case. I just don't know that people are buying that.
All right. Aaron Maté, you know, Trump also blamed immigrants for stealing jobs and government resources as he courted those separate groups of black voters and conservatives in Michigan. Is that going to work for Trump, do you think?
Well, you know, we have to acknowledge it did work to some extent in 2016 when he did run a xenophobic campaign, and that did appeal to a lot of people. Because the problem is we live in a political system that doesn't address the root causes of any of these issues. So take, for example, immigration. When we talk about immigration and we talk about demonizing immigrants, nobody addresses the fact that the U.S., whether it's under Joe Biden or Donald Trump, creates refugees around the world, especially people trying to come to the U.S. from Central America because of its policies of trying to overthrow their governments. When the U.S. imposes sanctions on, for example, Venezuela, which are carefully designed to destroy Venezuela's economy, as has largely happened, that's going to force people to flee because the economy collapses. Everybody knows that. Yet nobody wants to address that policy because the bipartisan establishment, whether it's Trump or Biden, is addicted to regime change and trying to undermine countries that we don't like. So that's an unfortunate aspect of this that just doesn't get discussed. But, you know, given that there's no one willing to call out these policies and nobody willing to actually offer policies that really will impact people, will improve people's lives, people's conditions, that's going to let people prone to blaming scapegoats. And in that case, it is true that blaming immigrants does often work. So I wouldn't be surprised if Trump has success in doing that. I don't think that will work with the African-American population who knows who Trump is. Trump famously called for executing the Central Park Five, these 5 wrongfully accused African-American men. He took out a front page ad calling for their execution, basically. They were exonerated. So everyone knows his record on this stuff. And this is why he's clinging to these demagogic efforts to stigmatize immigrants.
Estopinan, President Biden is now directly exploiting Donald Trump's criminal convictions in a new series of campaign advertisements. These advertisements are going to run in a campaign in the battleground states. Let's watch part of the advertisement.
In the courtroom, we see Donald Trump for who he is. He's been convicted of 34 felonies, found liable for sexual assault, and he committed financial fraud. Meanwhile, Joe Biden's been working, lowering health care costs and making big corporations pay their fair share.
So, Trump's conviction could influence voter behavior. In fact, a recent CBS YouGov poll showed 21% of independents said Trump's conviction would make them less likely to support him in the upcoming election. So, question is Trump going to lose support because of these convictions?
I don't think so, Anand, because the fact of the matter is that most of the American people, in my opinion, not only Republicans, but independents and conservative Democrats, see these so-called criminal charges as political persecution. And the fact of the matter is that the African Americans, Latino, young people want to support the re-election of President Trump because they see the crime, the inflation, the lack of able to pay the bills with rent, higher insurance costs, so on and so forth, as an impediment for them to grow and move forward as with President Trump before the pandemic. So the African American people want to change. They're tired. Everything that the President Trump said is right on the head. It's like, bingo, this is the problem. And you see that on TV. You see African Americans in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in New York City, in San Francisco, complaining about the illegal immigrants taking over their schools, taking over their communities, and they're tired of it, and they want this to stop. And that's why they're supporting President Trump, in my opinion. I don't think that this ad will have any legitimacy in losing the support that President Trump has. As you know, in the latest Iowa poll, he has 52% in comparison to President Biden, who has 32%, or 30%.
All right, Rina, let's talk about this ad. You know, Trump supporters are of the view that the former president's legal challenges are politically motivated. I mean, we just heard that from Art.
Right.
That, you know, it's been called a political hit job, the fact that he's facing all these prosecutions. Does an ad like that actually lend credence to that belief?
Well, more than political hit job, I've heard it been called the weaponization of the judiciary, which to me is far more dangerous. You know, that erosion of trust in our institutions has been happening for over a decade now, but was really rapid under the Trump administration. So 8 years ago, we started to hear the seeds of it, right? Sown by Trump and his ilk. People saying that you can't trust the other side. The other side will come after us because they don't like us, and they're going to weaponize the institutions against us. The institutions are stacked with liberals, and these are the people you need to be afraid of, the deep state. I remember that, 2016. Right. You know, just this week marked 8 years since we saw Donald Trump come down that golden escalator and announce that run. And the run was characterized not only by creating a distrust of our institutions and his fellow Americans, but essentially by saying that if they're coming after me, they're coming after you. And there are a crop of Americans, a very serious segment of the electorate that believes that. But I believe that segment is dwindling on, and there's empirical evidence to show it. We have midterms to show. And particularly American women are not buying that. We have the power of the purse in a way in which we never have had before in American history. We not only are more highly educated than our male peers,
but
we do balance our checkbooks differently than our mothers did.
But the thing is, does an advertisement like that actually reinforce the belief among those people to say that's what they wanted? They prosecuted this guy so they can get some ammo to go after him.
No, it doesn't reinforce that belief. It says that this is a person that was found guilty of a crime and was convicted by a jury of his peers. And he does wear that mark as a convicted felon. Is this who you want to trust to go into the White House? Do you want to send us into uncharted constitutional territory by putting a convicted felon to the White House? I would submit to the Republican Party that I grew my entire career in. This is a bad move. A convention is happening less than a month away now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where Republican leadership will gather, and they can make a decision. Do they want that convicted felon to be on the ballots for millions of Americans to choose? Because I can tell you right now, American women see their rights on the line every day. The American Civil Liberties Union has outlined 60+ scenarios in which individual liberties, individual rights, and the rule of law is under attack if Donald Trump comes back to office. American women will push back on that. They will remember this.
Erin, I want to get your view on this because I know you've done a lot of work on this. I mean, do Americans, even if they, just some Americans, can justifiably believe that there is something wrong in the way that the Department of Justice operates, or in the way in which what we call the deep state, the security systems in the country operate?
Yeah, I think Democrats really have to grapple with what has happened in the last 8 years. They did try to frame Trump as a Russian agent. People forget about that now because it's kind of embarrassing. But that scandal engulfed the country for many years. It pretty much defined Trump's presidency. It was a complete scam. The Clinton campaign made it up. The FBI ran with it. Corporate networks also believed in it. And it was a joke. And based on that, after seeing them trying to bring down a president by framing him as a Russian agent, people naturally are not going to trust the system. And seeing Joe Biden come into office and privately tell his aides he wants to see Trump prosecuted, and then seeing Trump get prosecuted in a case that honestly nobody, I think, beyond cable news green rooms cares about. Who cares that Trump falsified some hush money payments to an adult film star and should have labeled them as campaign expenses? It's just not going to move people. People are understandably going to be skeptical of that. Joe Biden, meanwhile, has plenty of corruption issues of his own. His son, after all, got a really lucrative board seat in Ukraine shortly after his father, Joe Biden, helped back a coup in Ukraine. So people see the double standard. I'm not a fan of either candidate. I think Trump is a terrible candidate, but I do have to recognize that he has been treated unfairly for the last 8 years, and it's because the people in the establishment just don't like him. He's one of them, but he annoys them, and therefore they're trying to shut him up through these judicial means.
Douglas Sloan, much is being made these days of President Biden's age and his cognitive ability. You know, we see social media replete with these videos of the president shuffling around, wandering off. A lot of those videos are very unfair because some of them actually have been manipulated, they've been doctored, but some of them are the real thing. This could hurt the president, of course, but could it also work for the president in terms of lowering expectations during the debate?
Well, I don't know about that. And Joe Biden has done a pretty good job when he's come up to a plate. You saw how he did with the State of the Union address. He did very well. When he is time to prepare for these events, he does very well. Very well. He always hits the mark. So, and Trump is only a few years younger, 3 years younger than Joe Biden. So that whole geriatric narrative, I think, affects both of them. And the bottom line is, you know, especially with many Democrats, we'd rather vote for Joe Biden on a hospital gurney than Donald Trump, as healthy as he may be, you know, because that is definitely not someone we want in office with all the vitriolic rhetoric that he's been espousing over the past several months.
Estopinan, President Biden reportedly raised $30 million at a fundraiser in Hollywood in California over the past weekend. At that event, President Biden said that his biggest fear if Donald Trump returns to office, returns to the White House, is that Trump is going to probably have the ability at that time to nominate 2 more justices to the United States Supreme Court. Let's listen to some of that.
Look, the Supreme Court has never been as out of kilter as it is today. when we said after the decision that overruled Roe v. Wade, the Dobbs decision, you had Clarence Thomas talking about the fact that there are going to be other things we should reconsider, including in vitro fertilization, including contraception, including all these things. And they're going. By the way, gay rights. But by the way, not on my watch.
So, Art, what do you make of that line of attack from the president?
Well, thank God that President Obama was there to help him off the stage, right? When he froze, he didn't know really where he was. The fact of the matter, Anand, is that if the President of the United States is elected, then he has the right under the Constitution to name the justices that need to be named. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the litmus test Democrats want, but the fact of the matter is that President Biden, unfortunately, as we see with our lying eyes, as some Democrats would like us to believe, is perfectly fine. He's not. Mm-hmm. He cognitively, he is suffering. I'm not a physician, but you don't have to be a medical doctor to see where he freezes in the White House, in Los Angeles, in Italy. And it's a disaster. And that's why the American people want to change. And they're looking at President Trump. Yeah, his age, it's close to President Biden, but he speaks to thousands of people in various states every day. And you can see his charisma, his energy, and it's a stark difference.
Okay, Rina, I want to get to you very quickly because I've got less than a minute. I mean, some of the things President Biden mentioned there in that speech, he was talking about women's rights, reproductive rights. He said that's squarely on the ballot. How do you see it playing out with key groups during this election?
Abortion is very much on the ballot this fall. You know, look, what's happening at the state level is you've got a lot of Republican state legislatures who are far-reaching. They're overreaching, excuse me, and that is problematic for sort of this younger crop of American women, 58 million women of reproductive age within these United States. We don't think they're going to go to the ballot box with this in mind of what the people within their state are doing. You know, look, I come from a conservative background. I can tell you, if we don't have freedom from, you know, in every form, then we don't have freedom at all. And American women are thinking about that. They're going to go to the ballot box with that.
Okay, we are going to have to leave it there. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C.